if you're over 60 and still relying on family to take care of you when things go wrong, you may be making the most dangerous mistake of your later years. I've seen it happen again and again. People who assume their children will show up, their spouse will always be there, or someone else will step in. But the truth? Help often comes late or not at all. And by the time you realize it, you're already vulnerable. In this video, I'll share the 6 pillars every older adult must build for themselves, because depending on others might feel safe now, but it could cost you your independence later. I remember a woman named Eileen. She was 78 when we met. A retired teacher, still sharp as a tack, with eyes that smiled even when her body was hurting. She had 3 grown children who loved her dearly. They called, sent flowers on her birthday, even visited when they could. But when her health began to decline more rapidly, Eileen looked at me one day and said softly, "I never imagined how alone this would feel, not because her kids didn't care, but because they couldn't be there every day. They had their own jobs, their own families, their own fragile lives to hold together." That moment stuck with me, not as a failure of love, but as a reminder. Support in older age must be wider than family. And it's not just emotional, it's practical, it's financial, it's spiritual, it's social. When I talk to people over 60, I often hear a kind of unspoken hope that the family they raised, the relationships they built, will naturally turn into a safety net. And sometimes it does. But just as often, I see disappointment, quiet resentment, a slow erosion of dignity when someone waits on support that never fully arrives. So what do? We build pillars, not literal ones, of course, but foundations, stable, personal sources of strength that don't depend on who calls or who shows up or who has time. Things we can stand on when everything else shifts. One of the most powerful pillars I've seen is financial autonomy. Let me be clear, this doesn't mean wealth. It means preparation. It means understanding your numbers, even if you're not a numbers person. It means knowing how long your savings will last, what Medicare covers and what it doesn't, and having a plan for what if. I once worked with a man named Harold, 72, a widower with a modest pension. For years, he believed his daughter would step in if he needed help. But when he fell and required a short-term rehab stay, he realized she couldn't afford to take off work or cover the copay. That's not on her. That's on a system that told him to expect too much from too few. After that experience, Harold started attending a financial literacy class offered by the senior center. He learned how to budget better, cut small unnecessary costs, and even found a way to downsize to a more manageable apartment. He told me, "I finally feel like I'm steering my own ship again." And that's the point. Money, when understood and managed, becomes less about comfort and more about control. Control over where you live, what care you choose, whether you can say yes or no without guilt. The second pillar is physical capacity, and how we invest in it every day. Our bodies change. That's inevitable. But how we partner with those changes, that part is up to us. I've worked with so many seniors who tell me, "I wish I'd started sooner." So I say this with deep respect. Start now. Whatever now looks like. Not because it guarantees perfect health, but because every ounce of strength you build today is freedom you'll still have tomorrow. There was a woman, June, who was 66 when she joined a gentle movement class I facilitated. She had arthritis in her knees and more than a little fear, but she showed up twice a week, walked laps around the building, practiced standing without holding on to the chair. A year later, she told me, "It's not just my legs that got stronger, it's my confidence." Confidence is what keeps you from saying, "I can't," too soon. Another pillar that often gets overlooked is social depth. I don't mean having dozens of friends. I mean having connection, a reason to get dressed in the morning, someone to check in on, someone who'd notice if you didn't show up. Social workers have known for years that loneliness isn't just unpleasant, it's dangerous. It's linked to heart disease, memory loss, even shortened lifespan. And yet, so many older adults drift into isolation, not from lack of love, but from logistics. Friends move, spouses pass away, kids live in other states. I had a client once, 74, named Robert. He was a quiet man, private, lost his wife a few years prior and didn't see much point in making new friends. Until one of our staff encouraged him to try the local book club. Reluctantly, he went. He sat in the back. Didn't say much the first few weeks. Then one day someone brought cookies. He smiled, said they reminded him of his wife's recipe. Another woman asked if he'd be willing to bring her a copy. And just like that, Robert wasn't invisible anymore. He told me months later, "I thought I was done growing. Turns out, I was just out of practice." Connection heals. Not always dramatically, but deeply. The people I see thriving after 60 aren't always the healthiest or richest or most social. They're the ones who build intentionally, who understand that support doesn't have to be borrowed from others. It can be cultivated from within and around. If there's one thing I've seen again and again with the elders I've supported, it's this. The people who fare the best emotionally aren't the ones who avoid hardship. They're the ones who learn how to sit with it. That's why emotional resilience is one of the most essential pillars we can build, especially after 60. Now, I've worked with people who have faced enormous grief. The loss of a partner after decades of life together. The gradual erosion of memory. The quiet reality of watching old friends pass one by one. And yet, some of those people still found ways to smile, to show up, to hope. There was a gentleman named Frank, 81, who lost his wife to Alzheimer's. By the time I met him, she'd been gone almost a year. He told me he still talked to her when he made breakfast. He'd say, "You'd laugh at how I burnt the toast again." It wasn't denial. It was something deeper. An honoring of love, mixed with sorrow, carried with grace. He wasn't trying to get over it. He was letting it live beside him, but not define him. That's what resilience looks like. Not pretending everything is fine, but letting yourself keep moving, even with the weight. Learning how to rest in sadness without becoming it. Frank had a phrase I'll never forget. He said, "Some mornings I wake up with grief in my chest, but I still water the plants." That's the kind of wisdom I wish more people heard. Not from textbooks, but from life itself. The fifth pillar that often emerges after 60 is purpose. Not as a job title or obligation, but as a personal spark. A reason to keep waking up. A reason to matter. Purpose doesn't have to be grand. It just has to feel real. I once worked with a retired truck driver named Raymond. After retirement, he struggled, felt aimless. He told me, "I've been useful my whole life. Now I just feel like I'm waiting for something to end." One day, someone at the community center asked him if he could help repair a squeaky wheelchair. He did. Then he fixed a sink. Then a light bulb. Before long, people were leaving little notes on the board. "Raymond, can you take a look at the door hinge?" "Raymond, my lamp won't turn on." He started carrying a little toolkit with him. Nothing big, just a screwdriver, some tape, pliers. But what changed wasn't just the tasks, it was him. He started walking straighter, joking again, smiling from his gut, because he mattered again. When I asked what made the difference, he said, "I'm not just waiting anymore. I'm needed again." That's what purpose does. It doesn't ask us to be young again. It asks us to stay awake to life. Even if your body slows, even if your world grows quieter, your impact doesn't vanish. You just have to look in new places. Maybe it's mentoring, or painting, or baking bread and giving it away. Maybe it's sharing memories with your grandchildren, or starting a garden and naming each plant after someone you love. Purpose is simply presence, offered in your own voice. And finally, perhaps the quietest but most powerful pillar is adaptability. This one's harder to explain, but I'll try. Adaptability isn't about being okay with everything. It's not pretending to like change. It's about not breaking when the wind blows. It's saying, "This wasn't the plan, but I'll find a way." There was a woman named Clara, 76, whose eyesight began deteriorating rapidly. She used to read every afternoon, mystery novels mostly. When reading became too hard, she grieved deeply. But then, slowly, she began to shift. She joined an audiobook club, then learned voice-to-text on her phone, then began writing small poems by dictation. One day, she told me, "I still miss paper, But now I let the story come to me. That's what adaptability is. It's not the absence of loss. It's the willingness to reshape joy, because life will ask us to bend. And the more we fight it, the more we feel broken. But when we soften, we find we can still grow, just in a new direction. I've seen seniors who lost everything: spouses, homes, jobs, roles, and still found beauty again. Not out of denial, but because they let go of what was and began to make peace with what is. That's the heart of this whole conversation. Support isn't just about who will take care of you. It's about how well you've prepared your life to support itself from the inside out. So ask yourself, am I building a life that still holds me, even if others can't? Am I investing in strength that isn't borrowed? If the answer is not yet, that's okay. Start small. Start today. If you're still here, feel free to leave your thoughts below. I read each one with care. There's a moment I've witnessed in so many conversations, often quiet, often accompanied by a slow sigh, when an older adult realizes the support they hoped for simply won't come in the way they imagined. It's not a moment of drama. It's not even disappointment in a person. It's something softer, a kind of reorientation. I always thought my daughter would move closer by now. I assumed my son would check in more. We were so close once. I don't know what changed. The stories are different, but the ache is familiar. We don't often talk about what it means to release expectations of family. Not from anger, not from bitterness, but from a quiet acknowledgement that people's lives unfold in directions we don't always anticipate. I once sat with a woman named Bernice, 83. Her son lived across the country. They spoke, but not often. He sent gifts on holidays, called on birthdays, but she missed the little things, the everyday things, the spontaneous visits, the ordinary companionship. She wasn't angry, just quietly tired of waiting. One morning over tea, she said, "I think I built my whole sense of future on someone else's timeline." That sentence stayed with me, because we all do this in some way. We plan our later years around someone else's availability, their choices, their lifestyle, their capacity. But what happens when that doesn't line up? That's when we feel stranded, not just physically, but emotionally. So we must gently reframe. Let me be clear, this doesn't mean we stop loving our families, or that we lower the bar so far we feel numb. It means we allow people to be human, flawed, busy, overwhelmed, and still love them for who they are. But also, we build a life that isn't held hostage by what they can't give. I've seen the difference it makes. There was a gentleman named Lou, retired firefighter, who used to wait by the phone every Sunday afternoon for a call from his daughter. When it came, he was elated. When it didn't, he was crushed. After months of this up and down, he began to reimagine his Sundays. He started volunteering at the local animal shelter just for a few hours. Then he picked up a side hobby, wood carving, and started bringing his pieces to the senior center to show others. Eventually, he told me, "If the phone rings, great. But if not, I still had a good day." It wasn't resignation. It was reclaiming his own rhythm. You see, the goal isn't detachment. It's dignity. The ability to remain open-hearted without becoming hollowed out by hope. It's okay to long for closeness. That's human. But closeness can be cultivated in many forms, through friendships, through purpose, through presence. That's something hospice nurses often reflect on. It's not the number of people in the room at the end that matters most. It's whether the person felt known, really known, along the way. And that knowing doesn't have to come only from children or siblings. It can come from a friend down the hall, a neighbor who brings soup, a staff member who remembers your dog's name. The key is not to shrink your life waiting for one door to open. Sometimes the richest connections come from places you didn't plan for. There was a man named Albert who used to say, "I thought I needed my family to visit every week. But what I really needed was to stop sitting in silence waiting for life to knock." He started writing letters to people he hadn't spoken to in years. Old friends, former co-workers, even his 7th grade teacher, if you can believe it. The replies trickled in. Slowly but surely, he told me, "I built a village out of memory." It was beautiful. That's the thing we forget. There's more than one way to be held. And often, the most powerful form of support is the one we give ourselves. Permission to keep going, even without applause, even without a witness. I sometimes encourage elders I work with to shift their language gently. Instead of saying, "They never call me anymore," try, "I wonder what connection I can create today." Instead of, "I just want someone to show up," try, "Who can I reach out to?" Even in a small way. This doesn't erase longing, but it invites movement. And movement, no matter how small, is a kind of healing. Turns waiting into walking, turns ache into action. Because here's the quiet truth. You are still the main character of your story. Even now, even here, there's a kind of sadness I've seen more often than I care to admit. It doesn't come with tears or raised voices. It's quieter than that. It shows up when someone says, "Well, I didn't want to be a burden." At first, those words sound noble, respectful, but if you sit with them long enough, you start to feel the pain hiding underneath. What I've learned is that many older adults don't actually fear aging. They fear becoming invisible. They fear being seen only as a problem to solve. I remember a woman named Darlene, 79, who moved into assisted living after a fall. Her children made the arrangements quickly, efficiently, and in many ways lovingly. But no one really asked her what she wanted. No one asked what she feared or what mattered most. She told me once, "It's like my life got moved, without me in it." And that broke my heart. Because even when support is given, if it's not accompanied by dignity, it can feel like control. That's why regaining agency, however small, is a critical part of building true support. Not the kind that holds you in place, but the kind that helps you stand taller. For Darlene, that came in simple ways. Choosing the time of her meals, rearranging her room, picking the curtains herself. She even made a little sign for her door that said, "Welcome to my nest." It might sound small, but when you've spent months being spoken about instead of with, even choosing your own blanket becomes an act of reclamation. These aren't just comfort choices. They're identity choices. And identity is something we continue to shape, even in our later years. I think about Henry, 84, who told me after his stroke, "I'm not the man I was." I said, "No, but maybe you're the man who teaches us how to adapt now." He didn't reply right away, but the next day, I saw him helping another resident with physical therapy stretches. He didn't say much, just nodded, showed, encouraged. It became his thing. Not because he could do what he used to, but because he decided to do what he still could. And that's power. Real support begins when someone believes they are still capable of giving, not just receiving. So how do we help people rediscover that? Sometimes it starts with one question. What would you like to be a part of? Notice it's not, what do you need? That's a different kind of question. Important, yes, but purpose isn't always born from need. It's born from belonging. In community groups I've worked with, we started asking that question regularly. And the answers surprised us. Some wanted to help others with paperwork. Some wanted to lead a prayer circle. Some just wanted to sit beside someone who couldn't speak and offer presence. None of it required perfection. All of it created connection. Because here's something that often gets missed. When older adults stop being included in contribution, they start internalizing that they're only here to receive. And that's when the light dims. You can see it. The shoulders sink. The voice softens. The answers become shorter. But when you hand someone a small piece of responsibility again, when you trust them with meaning, that's when something changes. There was a retired nurse named Elena. She'd stopped speaking much after her husband passed. Until one day, a younger resident had a panic attack, and no one knew what to do. Elena stepped in gently, confidently, held the girl's hand, whispered steady breaths. Afterwards, we asked her how she knew what to do. She said simply, "I've done it before. I remember what calm feels like." From then on, she became the go-to calm helper. It wasn't formal, but it made her eyes light up again, because she mattered again, not for what she used to be, but for what she still carried. That's what we need more of. Not pity, but partnership. Not assuming people are done, but asking what they'd still like to be part of. And here's the most hopeful part. It's never too late to begin. Even if your world has gotten smaller, even if you've been quiet for years, even if you feel like no one is asking anymore, you can still speak, you can still shape, you can still build. Because at its core, support is not just about having someone to lean on. It's about remembering that you still matter and creating spaces where others remember it, too. When I look back on all the conversations, the visits, the moments of quiet I've shared with older adults over the years, what stands out most isn't the hardship. It's the quiet strength. Not loud, not flashy, but present, steady. Like the way a tree keeps growing even after losing a few branches. We began this video with a difficult idea. That after 60, family, while deeply important, can't always be your only support. That realization can feel heavy at first, lonely even, but it doesn't have to stay that way. Because what I've seen again and again is that support can be built. Like a house, it takes time. Like a garden, it takes tending. But once it's there, it can hold you in ways you never expected. We've talked about 6 quiet, powerful pillars. Speech balloon financial autonomy, not about being rich, but about being ready. Speech balloon physical care, not about avoiding decline, but staying strong where you can. Speech balloon social connection, not quantity, but meaningful presence. Speech balloon emotional resilience, not pretending, but processing. Speech balloon personal purpose, not legacy, but daily meaning. Speech balloon adaptability, not control, but openness to change. Each one of these I've watched change lives. Not all at once, not always visibly, but in the small, daily ways that keep people rooted, that keep dignity intact. I think of Harold and his budget binder, June and her walking club, Robert and the book club that gave him back his laughter, Raymond and the broken wheelchairs he fixed like small acts of prayer, Clara and her poems written by voice, Elena and her presence that steadied a shaking heart, Darlene and her nest, Lou and his Sundays he reclaimed. None of them had perfect circumstances, but all of them made one quiet decision, to build a life instead of waiting for one to arrive. That choice? It's available to you too, even if you feel behind, even if things didn't turn out the way you hoped, even if you're scared to start. You are still here, which means it's not too late. Start with one small thing. A walk around the block. A note to an old friend. Question you've been afraid to ask. A boundary you've been needing to set. And if your heart is heavy with disappointment about how others have shown up or haven't, let that feeling be real. But don't let it become the whole story. There is still more ahead of you than behind you. Not in years, maybe, but in living. Because living is not just about time. It's about attention, connection, and the quiet belief that you are still worth building around. Even now, especially now. I'll end with something a hospice nurse once told me years ago. She said, "The people who leave peacefully aren't the ones who had the easiest lives. They're the ones who stopped waiting to be rescued and started choosing to live again and again." So if you've been waiting on a phone call, on a visit, on a version of your life that feels delayed, take today as your invitation to begin again, to build, to belong to your own life. If this kind of quiet reflection feels helpful to you, you're welcome to come back anytime. I'll be here,